Welcome to this public forum on our proposed affordable housing bylaw. Um, and with us here today, in addition to everyone on the planning board, who most of you know, is Emily Innes of Innes and Associates, who um, has been very helpful in working with the board on this and has done what you have. I think it's a handout, is the draft of, this is a draft only, of the affordable housing bylaw to replace housing balance, which is already in the bylaw, and also to replace the language that was inserted in the TOVOD and McMod, the two 3A zoning areas, because it won't be necessary anymore, assuming this gets adopted. So anyway, this is a public forum. Emily's going to start kind of to kick it off, give a presentation, hold your questions until she's finished, and then we'll take questions from everybody who wants to say something. Obviously, try to be to the point, and we'll try to have the people who've already spoken, we'll let other people say what they have to say before we come back around to them. We've allotted 1.5 hours for this, so at 6:30 everyone turns into a pumpkin, and maybe we'll get that far, maybe we won't. But anyway, thank you for coming, and I'll turn it over to Emily at this point.
Just a housekeeping item. Somebody reported that there's a black Ford out across from the library with their lights on. So if you're driving a black Ford, we don't want you to go back outside later on, an hour and a half from now, and discover you can't start your car.
Whenever they start with "there's a car with their lights on," I'm like, wait, is that? So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you here tonight, especially on such a cold night. If you can't hear me at any point, if my voice drops, please, raise your hand and I'll start projecting. I do have a mic on.
Now it's on.
Quite on at the time. All right, let's try that. So my name is Emily Innes. I'm from Innes Associates. We are a planning and design firm based in Newburyport, Massachusetts, so not very far away at all. We've been doing a lot of work with communities. I started the firm 4 years ago. We do a lot of work with communities on land use and zoning issues. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk with you about affordable housing. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the process, kind of the high level components of what we're talking about in terms of the zoning. And then you all, when you signed in, you should all have picked up a handout that has the actual draft zoning in it, and it's got line numbers next to it. So when you do have questions, if it's about a specific line, you can all jump to that line and have a look at it. So I'm actually helping out with two different pieces of process here. This first one, the July of 2024, that should be set to March 2025, is the bylaw to create affordable housing requirements and set up the enforcement requirements for those. All this is sometimes known as inclusionary zoning. Some communities call it that. And then in April and June, we're not really talking about it tonight, but just to let you know, there is a two-part process. We're going to be talking about a bylaw that limits the conversion of commercial space to residential in certain areas of Rockport's downtown. But that's for the future, just an FYI that you may see me again. This is a process that we've been going with for so far. So it's been a lot of work with the planning board during their regularly scheduled meetings to talk about what the needs are around developing an affordable housing bylaw, look at options from other communities, who's doing what makes sense for Rockport, and then try and start coming forward with the draft, which you have today, that's suitable for public comment. And I do want to stress very much that this is a draft. We are looking for comment today. And we, depending on what the comments are, there may be some changes that come out of this. The planning board is also continuing to look at it, again, because it's a draft, and might make additional tweaks after they hear the conversation today. So you can see the meetings that we've had with the planning board. In some cases, I've met with them. I've said, hey, here's what the research was, and they've come back and we, discussed it among themselves, and then I met with them again and we made changes. So it's definitely been an iterative back and forth process. Today, we're having the public learning about it, discussion and comment. We will meet again in February to talk about the final text that goes to the planning board's public hearing prior to town meeting. So there are still points at which people can have comment on this draft bylaw. This is not the only time. From that, then once the warrant is set, once the language is going to town meeting, that process continues, and then we start that phase 2 that I was telling you about for the residential conversion. So that piece is not coming to the spring town meeting, but depending on what happens today and at the planning board's next meeting, the expectation is that the affordable housing bylaw that we're talking about today would go to this year's town meeting. So what is inclusionary zoning? What does it mean when we talk about creating a zoning bylaw for affordable housing?
Emily? I'm
Yes.
sorry, let me just
Please
say
jump
one
in.
thing first. Emily Innes didn't just drop out of the sky. Last spring, I think it was, thank you. I was at a statewide zoning and planning conference in Worcester, Mass, at Holy Cross College, and one of the presenters for a number of different topics was Emily Innes, and she was very impressive. She had a tremendous breadth of knowledge. She's worked with other communities, so she kind of gets an idea of what people are doing and what other towns are doing in the state. And I reached out to her because I thought she'd be good for the initiatives we have in Rockport, and she mentioned 2 of them. The third one, which some people have alluded to, which is short-term rentals, and we can talk about that later, but we're not going to be, the planning board isn't going to be doing anything with short-term rentals in the near future. That's something that the select board is going to handle, because it's going to really, at this point, be a registration process and no more than that right now. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go right ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Always happy to have you all join in as you want to add color and discussion. So inclusionary zoning or affordable housing is a requirement that residential developments over a certain threshold, so this is where we start to try and get community input, provide a percentage of the units in the development as housing that is affordable to households with income in a specific range. And I've left that deliberately broad because I want to say, I want to call out the components that we're looking for that the community may want to have input in. So the first is that threshold. How big is that new development? If somebody is bringing in a development of 5 units, 10 units, 20 units, what's the threshold? Does it matter if it's a rehab and there were already existing units? Are you counting only the new units? Are you counting all of them? So these are some of the things that we have to think about. The percentage of units, so is it 5% of the units have to be affordable, 10, 20? What's the appropriate range to do that in? And the affordability level. So affordability level is measured by the median income of the household. We're going to run into this term again. And so what is that set at? A common one is 80%. What we call area median income. Some communities like to go deeper for different reasons. So these are the things that we're going to talk about tonight. These are choices a community can make when they create the affordable housing bylaw, and that's what we're going to present. So you already have inclusionary zoning. This isn't a new concept to the town. It's you have the housing balance bylaw, and you also adopted the MBTA communities multifamily overlay district, and there was an amendment on the town meeting floor that added affordable housing to that, effectively as a footnote. So My remit was to sort of look at both of these, come forward and offer some alternatives for something that would merge both of them. So one thing that I had to keep in mind is what would be suitable for a town-wide bylaw that would apply to any developments in the town. And the other thing is what would be compliant with the with Section 3A of Massachusetts General Law 40A, which is what's known as the MBTA Communities Act. So it wasn't just a matter of saying, here's the bylaw. I had to check it for a couple of different things. So housing balance bylaw is section 8J, and the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District bylaw is section 13. Sorry, I'm missing my Roman numerals here. So just in case you want to look back at those. So next question, do other towns and cities have inclusionary zoning? And we were part of the research last summer was to find out who has that inclusionary zoning that already exists. What do they do? What are their choices on threshold or affordability or percentages? Now we looked at a lot more towns than this, but what I did was I picked the ones that had a similar population size for this slide. So if you go back and look at the planning board meeting presentations, we have all of the communities that we looked at, but I just wanted to say, who did we look at that has a similar population size to Rockport? In some cases, like Cohasset, for example, you can see that there's also another coastal community in there. So that fed into it. We also looked at communities that were maybe larger, like for example, Gloucester, right next door. You know, what are local communities doing, as well as communities throughout Massachusetts. So why do you need, you've got inclusionary zoning, okay, it's spread out of 2 different places, but why would you want to update it, not just to incorporate what was done at town meeting last spring, but think about updating it. So you've all been working on a housing production plan, and that housing production plan demonstrated, the research that went behind it, the findings of that plan demonstrated that there was a need for additional affordable housing in the town. The current housing balance bylaw only applies to residential developments that meet very specific criteria. So it's not going to apply to every new development that comes in, and so that becomes a question, should that happen? And then in addition, because of the requirements for the multifamily overlay district were added as a floor amendment to town meeting, they weren't fully integrated into this. So they're not integrated into the overall strategy. So that's the reason for bringing these two together. So I'm going to throw a couple of terms at you now because we're going to be referring to these as we talk throughout the presentation. I want to make sure that you've seen them. So I mentioned area median income, AMI. A lot of people ask, what is the area median income? Now this is based on the says the metropolitan statistical region that includes the town of Rockport. Gotta love the legal technical language, but basically it is I think it's the Boston, Quincy, Cambridge includes this area as well. And so this is a key discussion when talking with communities about affordability, because 80% of the area median income may not be affordable within that community itself. So for example, I do a lot of work in the western part of Massachusetts as well as this area, and their AMI may be looking at like the Springfield metro area or the Pittsfield metro area, but they're a small town of 2,000 people, 2,500 people, 5,000. What's affordable in those communities isn't the same as the metro area. Next thing is the Subsidized Housing Inventory, or the SHI. This is a list of affordable units that qualify that the state keeps. And this is, if you hear something about, we haven't met our 10% of affordable housing, sometimes that makes its way into community conversations. The SHI is what they're referring to. There's a state requirement that communities meet or exceed 10% on the SHI, the Subsidized Housing Inventory. If they don't reach that, there's something you may have heard of called 40B, and reaching the 10% or above provides some flexibility for the community. Sometimes people talk about it as protection from 40B development. So that's why that is important. And EOHLC, I'll sometimes refer to that as HLC, is the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Used to be DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, and DHCD tripped off the tongue a little bit more easily than EOHLC does, just so you know who they are. So, a lot of people will then say, well, that's great, you told me about the AMI, what is it? So I pulled this from Mass Housing Partnership. This is their one mortgage program. It is the 2024 area median income limits. Mass Housing Partnership is one of the state agencies that provides assistance for people to have housing. So they publish these every year. The fiscal 2025 wasn't out yet when I checked. So you can see 100% of area median income. So that's sort of the base level for the market level for a household size of one person all the way up to 8 people. And then above that, I did they have the 80% AMI, they publish it. So 80% of AMI in this region for one person is $91,000. They also do it for rental rates, which I did not pull for this presentation, but I do have. So let's talk about what you have now versus what's in this document. Now that we've got the terms out of the way, we know what we're looking at. So I've got 3 columns up there. The first one, of course, are the criteria we're looking at. The second is what you have in the Housing Balance Bylaw now. The third is what was in the amendment to the MBTA multifamily overlay district. And the last column is what's proposed in the zoning that's in front of you for discussion today. So right now, and this is to kind of show you what may or may not have changed based on what you have now. So right now, in the Housing Balance Bylaw, your threshold, remember that's the number of units that triggers the requirement. Your threshold is 6 or more units authorized by special permit. MBTA multifamily is 10 or more units in the McMod, the multifamily, the MBTA communities, et cetera. And that the proposed is 6 or more units in any zoning district. So in other words, the Housing Balance Bylaw is limited to a special permit, which is a type of approval for development. The multifamily overlay district, that's as of right, because the multifamily overlay was as of right. So now what we're saying is anywhere in the community, if you have 6 or more units, you're going to be required to follow this bylaw. Now that doesn't mean that everywhere in the community will allow 6 or more units. The rest of your zoning comes into play. So what is allowed in each zoning district is governed by the zoning district. But if that zoning district allows housing, multifamily housing, then this would apply if it's 6 or more units. So not much of a change except for the area of applicability and the permitting process. Minimum percentage of units, so 10 in the Housing Balance Bylaw, 10% in the McMod, and then in the proposed new bylaw, we've split it. So you had an economic feasibility analysis done as part of your planning for the MBTA Communities Act. And what that document said is that this town could, it was required by the state if you wanted to do more than 10% of units at less than 80 or less than 80% AMI. That document showed that you could afford a deeper level of affordability, which means that for 6 to 13 units, we're saying 10%, but at 14 plus units, 15%. That allows you to have more units. It's backed up by the EFA. So when this goes to HLC for their review, because it affects the MBTA Communities Bylaw, they will need to see it. You can also submit the EFA to justify that deeper level of affordability. Fractional units. This is going to come into play twice in our conversation. So right now, you have if it's 0.5 or higher, it's rounded up. Less than 0.5, rounded down. Not far off what we all learned in math class in elementary school, although there's an even odd number consideration in there as well. MBTA rounded up to the next highest number, and then the proposed new bylaw, 0.5 or higher, is rounded up. We're going to talk about provision in a little bit that may affect that. Fractional fee in lieu, and this is that provision. You don't allow that in the housing bylaw or in the MBTA. We are considering that. That's been part of the planning board's discussion, and it's currently in your zoning. And what that says is if you have a fractional unit, let's say it comes out to 5.2%, or 5.2 units rather. The way it's set up now, you would round that down and you just get 5 units. We're suggesting with the fractional fee in lieu that they would have to pay for that 0.2 unit. The developer would have to pay for that 0.2 unit. That would be funds coming into the town. Those funds would be given to the Affordable Housing Trust so that they could add all funds coming in under the fractional fee in lieu and use it to support additional affordable housing. So that's under discussion tonight. Would love to hear your comments about that. Income level, maximum levels for lower moderate income as established by DHCD. So we would have to change this anyway because DHCD no longer exists. It's now HLC and another department. MBTA is 80% of area median income. Now you can already see that there's a difference here, and that one is just like maximum levels and the other has a specific percentage. So we're doing 80% or less of area median income in the new proposal. Definitions. Here's some other things. So those are the main criteria. Those are the main differences between what you have now and what you're proposing in terms of the criteria that we talked about. We've also added definitions. So these defined terms that we've talked about weren't actually in the Housing Balance Bylaw or in the MBTA bylaw. We are adding development standards. So what this does is it talks about if you are putting the affordable units that we require in, we require that you do it in a certain way. So they have to be indistinguishable from the other units. They have to have, the people who live in those have to have the same access to amenities as the people who live in the rest of the development. So if you have 10 units and or 20 units and 2 of them are, should be more than that because of the 14 plus, if those are affordable and you have common space, people who live there also have access to common space. If you have a dog park as part of your development, they also have access to that. So whatever that requirement is here. In the Housing Balance Bylaw, there's the language has the intent that these units be on the subsidized housing inventory, that they're eligible, but it's not very clear. You have to read into it to understand what it's saying. That's not in the MBTA district at all. It just asks for affordable housing. It doesn't say what to do with it. Here we are requiring that they are eligible for the SHI, which means that any new unit coming on will help boost up the number of units, affordable units on the SHI. We have submission requirements. The Housing Balance Bylaw has some, MBTA did not. We're adding some additional submission requirements. In other words, what does the developer have to do to tell you what they're doing about these affordable units and how they're providing them? Administrative requirements. Right now, the Housing Balance Bylaw, this goes through the Board of Appeals. So if you remember, the Housing Balance Bylaw requires that these units are applied when there's a special permit, which means that a developer has to go through the Board of Appeals and through the Planning Board potentially. Sometimes special permits are also Board of Appeals. There's no administrative requirements in MBTA. And here we are streamlining it, so depending on the type of approval process, if it's an as of right, it will go to the building inspector. If it's one of the other approval processes, it will go to the planning board. In all cases, the planning board and the Affordable Housing Trust have a role in understanding what the proposal is from the developer and working with the state to make sure that everything is following the requirements so these can be listed on the subsidized housing inventory. And we also have added conditions of compliance that aren't there now. In other words, they have to prove that the developer or the person who's doing these units have to prove that they have complied with the requirements. That's not in either of the zoning bylaws at the moment. So we've added, I'm just going to go through an outline of the text. We've added these definitions to your section 2 definitions of your zoning bylaw. So they're not within the article itself, or within the bylaw itself about this. It's added to your main list of definitions, and all the definitions are in the draft that you have in front of you. Then we're replacing Section 8J Housing Balance with Section 8J Inclusionary Zoning. We have these 8 subsections in there. The purpose purpose, when you add a specific article, you usually say why you're doing it for the record. So the purposes are promoting public health, safety, and welfare, encouraging a diversity of housing opportunities, provide for a full range of housing choices, increase the production of affordable housing units to meet existing and anticipated housing needs, work to overcome economic segregation, and implement the recommendations of the Town of Rockport Housing Production Plan, which is one of the main reasons for doing this. Applicability, so this is where I talked about it's 6 or more dwelling units for any development throughout town. We have a prohibition that you can't break up, the prohibition on segmentation means that somebody can't break up the project. So they say, oh, I'm gonna do 3 units now and I'll do 3 units later, so I don't have to do the affordable housing. It's not really 6 units, it's 2 3-unit projects. We've said you can't do that. And then there's some exemptions in there for certain types of housing. Affordability requirements, I mentioned already, 80% of less of AMI, and it has to be eligible for listing on the subsidized housing inventory. This is the provision of housing. This is just the table that I mentioned earlier of the 6 to 13, 10% at AMI, 80%, 14 plus, 15% at 80%. Fee in lieu, so the applicant can request this ability to do the fee in lieu instead of rounding up. So if you get to 5.7, you would have to round up to 6. They can say, hey, I'd rather just pay for the 0.7 rather than build an entire one. Value has to be based on current market values, and we're talking about how to enshrine that in zoning. The Affordable Housing Trust is responsible for recommending the action to the select board and approving the median dwelling unit cost used in the formula. So in other words, the applicant comes and says, I want to do this. I've done these calculations. The Affordable Housing Trust would look at those calculations, make sure that they're correct, and then provide a recommendation to the select board. The select board approves that request, and then the request has to be approved before the applicant applies for a building permit, site plan review, or special permit. So these are the steps that the applicant has to take. Development standards, we have A through G. I won't go through them right now, but effectively affordable units have to be integrated with, in, and dispersed throughout the development, provided with the same access to shared amenities, and granted occupancy at the same proportional rate as market rate units. So you can't build all the market rate units and say, oh, I forgot to do the affordable, I can't do them now. Say you've got, 8 market rate and 2 affordable, you have to do, 4 market rate in one and 4 market rate in the other, if you're doing any sort of phasing. And primarily this is going to apply to much larger developments, if you even have such a development come in. Administration, building inspector is usually required for administrating zoning, so it just mentions that. Planning board can adopt and amend rules and regulations for this, so they can, if they need to, provide more information, such as the application, the required documents for that. State has recommendations, for example, for a lot of these things, but they may change, so we don't put them in the zoning, we just allow the planning board to adopt them. Submissions, this is where the applicant needs to basically submit information to the planning board and the Affordable Housing Trust. Those two bodies can work with the state, they review the document, work with the state to make sure everything is correct before you get into a situation in which an application is being approved. You don't want to have the application approved and then find out that this doesn't work, so you have to work with the state first. And then finally, the building inspector can't issue a building permit unless they're satisfied that all conditions of the section have been met. So, a building permit, yeah. And that's it. So I am, along with members of the board, we're more than happy to answer questions on this. But just to let you know, the next step is February 6th. Anything that came out of this meeting or that comes to the board over the next week and a half or so, that might change it. We would make some edits. We're going to have confirm that final text on the 6th for the public hearing, which will be March 6th. So again, there's another month after we confirm the final text before the public hearing. And with that, I'm just going to stop there. And if I need to put the zoning up on the screen, just let me know. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Emily. So Bob, you you wanna do, passing a mic? Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking. Yeah. Sorry, people are gonna be, everyone's gonna be holding the mic, that's okay. You'll hold it? Okay. Good. The mic holder.
Right, I didn't have to
Right.
volunteer for that.
So, raise your hand if you want to make a comment, and our friendly mic holder, Tom Mikas, will come by with the mic.
So I'm just curious, with the in lieu of, how, if you've investigated other towns who've done in lieu of, who've done percentage in lieu of, or who have not done it, and what the results were for those towns.
Excellent question. We have not done an analysis of the results, and I haven't done a systematic analysis of it. I did look at a couple of different options when looking at the language. And really the success of the results depends on how much development is done in that town, right? If no development
Sure,
comes in, yeah.
I'm just curious of towns that have actually done
Yes.
one of those three things and how they found it. Were they sorry they did it, or did they, were they happy about it?
Yeah, we can certainly have a look at that. My
I
team
would
and I
appreciate
research.
that.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Planning Board, for doing this, Mr. Chairman. And through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a question regarding the ADUs. They're called accessory dwelling units. And we know now that the Affordable Housing Homes Act, called Affordable Homes Act, now has been passed, has dramatically changed the ADU situation. And I was looking at this and saying, okay, we have 4 or 5 units, and that's the only thing that they can get involved in? Or will you guys be looking at this and how the ADU law can be included in the inclusionary zoning part? If not, will the ADU law changes be added to the existing ADU bylaw that we have in town already? I just wanted to know what your plan would be.
Yeah, okay, well, you're ahead of us, because we're not there with, you're talking about just so everyone knows, Bill is talking about a different law which has its own set of regulations. It's not per se an affordability law. It's more just expanding the ability of a community to have 80 accessory dwelling units. It's kind of a different issue. We haven't gotten to that yet. We are going to get to that, and we'll certainly be looking at issues of affordability in context of that law too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll add a little bit to that too. One of the things about the ADU and the regulations that are sort of built around ADUs are that inherently they're smaller units, no larger than 900 square feet or 1/3 of the existing home. So the idea behind some of this push forward on the ADUs to be as bright and easier to build is that inherently these units may be more affordable. And then the only overarching question there is they're more affordable if they're not short-term rentals and are rented out, $3,000 a week or whatever. So the idea, and we already have this in place in town with the 6-month minimum lease
But the new
that
law,
keeps that.
but the new law specifically prohibits short-term rentals.
No, it allows a community to limit them, is what it does. Well, we're kind of going off
All right.
the point of the meeting here. That'll be the subject of another meeting, I'm sure, Bill. So why don't we go to some other questions?
But it is called the Affordable Homes Act.
Correct.
It's confusing.
Hi.
Yeah, we
Okay,
try to
let's-
refer to that as small A affordable versus
Okay.
SHA units that are technically affordable by the state and federal regulations. So.
All right,
Okay.
so I'm trying to read between all the lines. And I don't know if it's just me who isn't understanding or my math is wrong. But this is called the affordable housing, but I don't see a whole lot of affordable housing happening. the percentages aren't out there. You're talking about 10% of 13 units. How many of those are actually affordable? 1.3, which brings it down to 1. So the other 12 units are just regular units. Where are we housing our older senior citizens who don't have those incomes? They're not ready for nursing homes, assisted living, anything like that. And our children, they can't afford to buy a house. And nothing is helping them. They work hard, but our medians, I mean, you're comparing incomes with Boston and Cambridge. We're not Boston and Cambridge. We're not a city. We're a small seaport town. Our kids are working in small personal companies. They're not doing six-figure salaries and being able to afford this. So it's either called something wrong altogether, the name needs to be changed, because it's certainly not affordable.
Are you, is that you have a question, or is that
Well,
a statement?
my question is why are we calling this the Affordable Housing Act? Because I feel like it's being pushed through and nobody's hearing the voices of the people in the community who need to find places to live.
You want to answer that?
I can answer some of that.
say, go ahead.
I'll
have
answer
some
it on the
comments.
technical side, and then I'll turn it over to the planning board for policy discussions. So on the technical side, this one of the remits is that this has to be consistent with Section 3A. That's the one that's the MBTA Communities Act. So if you look at the compliance guidelines as stated, there is a limitation on the affordability, and that limitation is the 80% of area median income and 10% of units. I 100% agree with you that you are one of the many communities where the 80% AMI does not bear any relationship to what is affordable in your community. I don't disagree whatsoever, but these are the numbers that are in those guidelines. So I mentioned the economic feasibility study that was done, the economic feasibility analysis, and this is how the guidelines allow communities to alter the affordability based on what the EFA comes up with. So in some communities, they find that 80%, 10%, that dividing line is all that community can afford to do. In other communities, they find that you can do a deeper level of affordability. And what that means is you can either do more units, such as the 15% that's presented there, or hang on a sec, or you can do deeper affordability. So you could go below the 80%, right, and look at what does it mean to be 65% or something like that. What's presented in front of you today for discussion, and I hear your comments, is that 15% rather than the deeper affordability. But again, that's why we're asking for comments. So what you said is important. But I hear your frustration. So because this level is not, and this is true incidentally of a lot of inclusionary zoning bylaws, is it doesn't address all of the affordability needs in any community. It's one strategy, but it's not the only strategy.
You're right. I mean, it doesn't, but I'm the whole, you want to talk about the 3A thing. I mean, yes, we have a rail system here, but originally the rail system was for tourists. And
Understood on that, but right now what we're just
I
talking
don't want
about
to
is
look
the
like
affordable
Brooklyn
housing.
here. I'm in Brooklyn. You go into Beverly where they've done this, and it's like driving in New
Right.
York.
Well, okay, just a couple of things here. First of all, appreciate your comments. Yeah, it is odd that Rockport is included with Cambridge and Boston and Quincy in terms of the area median income, but that's done by the state. They make the determination as to what communities are included in that.
Actually,
And that's
sorry, Jason, that's federal government.
federal government, sorry, so it's even higher than the state. And they make that determination. So that's something we have to live with. But the other thing we have to live with is, any other member of the board wants to pipe up here, the realities here. It's great to be able to provide housing to, as you said, to the, senior citizens, people with, families who don't have any income. But that housing has to be built by somebody. And it has to be built by a developer or someone who's going to develop the property. And the planning board is trying to have the balance between having a level of affordability that allows some people to live in the housing who wouldn't be able to, but at the same time not making the requirements so stringent that a developer will look at the idea of any kind of housing in Rockport and say, you know what, I can't afford it, I can't justify it. And that's kind of the balance that we have to live with, because we're not looking at public housing. This isn't housing that's being built by the government or
No, absolutely
anything like
not.
that. So
I
that's
understand that.
that's why we've kind of come up with, and we've had discussions about this, come up with the numbers that we have. It's not perfect, but it's way better than what's there now. Did you want to say something? Okay. Do we have next? Z has his hand up. Diane has her hand up.
So I wanted to address the woman also behind us. I don't know your name, but I certainly hope next Saturday you will come. This Saturday, what's today?
Yeah.
This Saturday to a forum that will help explain some of the questions that you're having. My question is that it's very clear, and you guys know this, you've heard me talk before. So I'm the chairperson of the Affordable Housing Trust, and that we fall somewhere in between. We're not public housing, and we're not private developers. We are the people in between, and all affordable housing that is in this town right now is 100% affordable housing, not 10%, not 15%, and that it has the spectrum of AMI from 30% all the way up to 60 or 80%. So this is the area that needs to be addressed. We'll talk. That this woman is talking about. So in order to bring this up to perhaps a better idea, is the Affordable Housing Trust has to be funded. We need money in order to do this, and that's what in lieu payments would go into the Affordable Housing Trust. And in my research, a lot of towns have in lieu of payment that it is an incentive not for private builders to build as much housing as they can. So, for instance, if somebody builds 6 units and one of them has to be affordable, that developer could easily say, oh, the heck with it, I'll only build 5 and make them bigger and more expensive, and we get nowhere. So I would really suggest that we think about the in lieu of payment for all, not just the fractional units, but the the trigger number.
Assuming that money goes to the trust.
Assuming that money goes to the trust. And another reason is because developers are developers. They're not affordable housing managers. And they take a tremendous amount. There's a marketing, there's lottery, there's certifying, there's annual. It costs a private developer a minimum of $10,000 to manage this particular unit. And if it's an ownership unit, it's between 4 and 5% of the price of the unit. So it's a disincentive unless we can build this in a little bit better. One of the ways that I just heard about is Ipswich, I believe. I'm not sure about this, but Ipswich, I believe, has an in lieu of payment for every development, including single-family homes.
Wow.
Single-family homes are the largest. That's who's building in this town. They're not building. How many multiple family units are being built in this town? Very few. Very few. So I would consider, maybe think about some things out of the box, perhaps taking a look at that HPP and what kind of population we have. The other thing is to get that AMI down. The feasibility study said 10%, it's 60% AMI. 60% AMI includes DPW workers, teachers, town workers that are average median income, not average, median income in this town by the 2020 census is under $90,000 a year. And that puts that 60% square there. If we want to keep our people here, we've got to get that AMI lowered. And the feasibility study said 10% at 60, 10% at 60% AMI or 15% at 80% AMI is feasible for developers here in this town. So I would really encourage you to consider that. And the in lieu of, and to lower that AMI. And so make a note of it. That's my, and I would be happy to talk to you more about the research that I've done in terms of the salaries of the people that live here. Obviously it's not, and also, which I always think is very interesting that people don't understand, is 80% AMI and 60% AMI is considered by the state as low income. So that when you hear people saying we want low income housing, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about your neighbor. Thank you.
Is there any initial reaction?
Hey, wait a second. Okay. A couple of people had their hands up. Sir, do you want to raise your hand?
Well, I had mine up.
No, I know you have, but this gentleman.
This gentleman has his hand up.
Yeah, okay, so let's.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I've got a real problem with your purpose statement here on page, whatever it is, section 8, inclusionary zoning. And it's saying provide a full range of housing choices for households of all incomes, ages, and sizes. Now, if you were to go down to the town hall and look at the advertisements on the town bulletin board for a typical town worker, might be somebody on the DPW or some other thing, it would range, I would think, probably around in the $25 an hour category or so. And that translates out, I think, to about, I don't know, 20, 35, something like that, 50,000 a year. So you're not really talking about all income levels. What we're talking about are the people that are making that average median income thing. And that's how the state gets around saying these things are affordable, which, you know, if you're a lieutenant or a captain in the Massachusetts State Police, and you're getting about $240,000 worth of overtime every year, that is affordable. But it isn't for anybody that's working for this town out on Basket Neck freezing like they were the last couple of days. And I think this thing is a sham right from the get-go as far as being affordable in any sense of the true meaning of the word. And I think that if you're going to put this out as something for all people, then those types of wages should be considered. I think perhaps in Rockport, maybe, the reason why we have a DPW that's sustainable is because probably some of those people have family here that have lived here for 188 years or something. But I don't see how anybody new coming to this town, married, has a little kid or anything like that, is going to look at this and say, oh yeah, gee, thanks a lot. All I got to do is get 200 hours of overtime every week and I'll be able to pay for a house here.
Okay.
So I see lots of percentages and I hear affordable. Can you give me an example of what dollars we're talking about here for income when it comes down to?
In terms of the,
I mean, what's this? Oh, got my, I guess I got my answer.
so this is the, yes, okay, this is working. So this is the 2024 AMI limit, so 80% and 100%. So I'm sorry, I did not calculate 60%.
I just gave you a number.
Okay, perfect, even better.
Yeah, one of the things we're trying to get a sense of from people, especially tonight, is what people think about the thresholds, the percentages, all of that, some of which is adjustable. I think the board has started out with the premise that we've got the sort of the MBTA districts, which force us to only have the most percentage can be 15% at 80% AMI, or 10% at 60% AMI. Our thought was that we would make regulations that applied to the entire town, so we're not singling out the MBTA district per se. Certainly, we could look at that at some point, but having a higher level of affordability for the rest of town, but we hadn't considered that. But we want to get your opinions on that. And the threshold of 6 units was another item I thought that would be interesting. Because different towns have different thresholds. I think we mentioned Ipswich. Ipswich has a threshold of the first unit being required at 7 units, but a single-family home, if you're buying or building a new single-family home, you would put about $10,700 towards to the Affordable Housing Trust there for the building of future units. 2-family would be double that, et cetera, et cetera.
But just to finish, does the board have any initial comments to what this lady just talked about?
Which lady are you talking about? Yeah, Diane, yeah, we've talked, Diane has been at our meetings and we've discussed some of these issues, but we're not here to have a dialogue so much right now as to hear from you folks. And Diane, has expressed her opinion very well.
Many times. Hey, Diane?
Yeah, yes, I would second everything that the woman who spoke in back said about what is truly affordable and what Z. Cephala over there said. And it all pivots on the state's heartless and dishonest definition, the 80% of the AMI. And sadly, we're all stuck with that. That's what meets their requirements to get out from under 40B, the monstrosity that they have created, which is what's driving all of this threat from the state. If you don't do as they say, far worse will fall upon you. So we're acting under coercion, if we're acting at all. And those figures I find mind-boggling. If you are earning minimum wage, $15 an hour, God help you, you might live in a cardboard box or the homeless shelter or a tent in the woods. You wouldn't stand a chance at any of this. That's slightly over a third of the one person qualification for the AMI. So heartless and dishonest, and we're stuck with it. I went through what Emily Innes came up with and have page after page with scribblings of what are comments, objections, corrections, what have you. They're not questions for the most part. The only thing that, and I certainly think it would be inappropriate to try and go through them all here.
Do you want to share those? Yeah.
I would hand them on to you. I would expect to get my copy back and hope that you could read my scribbles. Hope, I underline. But just to start out at the beginning, your proposed definitions, you're adding things, group home, and things of that nature. Uses which are not in the current zoning.
Right.
The zoning code is exclusionary, meaning if it isn't specified in the code, you can't do it. For instance, you can't build a nuclear power plant if you have the space because it isn't in the zoning code. So if you add those uses, although you're excluding them here, the group home and so forth, you're saying in effect that they're going to go somewhere. And something is missing, and that is, although you would add the uses, that goes in a separate article, you missed something there, I think, because you also have to add them to the table of permitted uses. I have the citation here somewhere. Anyway, it's a separate portion of the zoning.
We did talk about just exactly what you're talking about, Toby, that they're not identified in the zoning. We'll deal with that, but that's a very good point. No, it is.
And that's not an easy question, where those things which are not directly relevant to this, where we would put them in the zoning. It would be a matter of much moment and I would think of some controversy. And, going on from there, you know, vehemently object to just simply the title of it. The planning board and I also have sneered at the term housing balance, which was doubtless trendy planners' jargon 30 years ago, just the ticket. And I would say inclusionary zoning is the equivalent now, and we need to call it what it is, which is affordable housing required or affordable housing requirement. You could flip a coin either way. And not so much the particulars, but the whole theory of it. Z spoke about purpose. You don't need purpose. It cannot be binding. And the Government and Bylaw Committee, they haven't got here yet, is going through the code of bylaws, trying to eliminate purpose across the board. They haven't yet got there. There is a purpose in the code of bylaws for Diane's outfit, the Affordable Housing Trust, and it's not trust fund. You're right, that was in the state's enabling legislation. It's called a municipal affordable housing trust fund, but ours was never a fund. We're not trust fund brats, or most of us aren't. Anyway, so purpose, and it seems to me that all of those things, Z found fault, I think rightly with one of them, are abstract, idealistic. Most of them are things that zoning cannot possibly address. They're things that people might want, but we're talking about private property. And so I think it's wishful thinking, and I would ask you to get rid of purpose and just say that we've been through this twice before with the planning board with their repackaging of the whole zoning code, 130 pages of it in one article, if you can believe that, at a town meeting, and also with the McMaw, that's the